Chapter 1767. Focusing Rainbow. As the most powerful arcane energy in Azeroth, the Titans gave the Blue Dragons a magical artifact to control magic. It helped Maligos the Hairweaver manage the magic of Azeroth. If necessary, it could even absorb the arcane energy of the entire Azeroth, but this would make it extremely unstable. Once it exploded, it would be enough to blow up the entire Azeroth into a second Outland. In the original history, in the next important time node, Pandaria's Mystery, Gurus Hellscream used the Blue Dragon artifact, Focusing Rainbow, to condense a magic bomb, and threw it over to destroy Theramore like a nuclear bomb. In order to save Jaina, Ronan, the exemplary character of human lousy promotion, sacrificed his life. This is one of the greatest crimes of Garushian history. And because Theramore, which had been operating for decades, was destroyed, Jaina's hair turned white overnight, and she became an extremely extreme, almost crazy person. She was blinded by hatred and became unable to see the general situation. Even when she returned to the Dalajan Kirin Tor assembly, she tried her best to advocate ignoring foreign enemies and directly declaring war on the Horde. She was just short of being further corrupted in the game and then being pushed down as a boss in a dungeon. However, in this life, Gurus still wanted to play with the nuclear bomb, Focusing Rainbow? He had to ask Duque first. This is a mass-produced version of Focusing Rainbow. It's a bit like a small magic net and can absorb all arcane energy within a 30-mile radius. You can set the time when it releases the energy again. That is, when you throw it out, it will explode in about a few seconds, Duque said seriously. Power? If it's just this operation, it can probably flatten 1/10 of Theramore. When Duque said this, Jaina's expression suddenly changed. Theramore was quite huge. After 11 years of construction with the full support of the Alliance, Theramore was a full 10 kilometers long and wide, which was 100 square kilometers. Blowing up 10 square kilometers at once was definitely more powerful than all the cannons of today, and even the main magic cannons of the Dalajan. Jaina noticed the other meaning in Duque's words. Then what about the other operation? Connect to the magic net and draw in a large amount of arcane energy for a short period of time. In theory, it can cause an even more powerful explosion, but the duration of the explosion will become uncontrollable, and it will cause part of the weave to collapse. Duque shrugged. Unless you're planning to die with your enemy, please don't play this game. You're not immortal. When Jaina heard the first half of Duque's sentence, she was so scared that her face turned pale. However, she soon felt Duque's concern and deep love. With this, even if Gurus brought his entire tribe to Dustwallow Swamp, he still wouldn't be able to take down Theramore. No, it should be said that even if they succeeded, they would vomit 18 liters of blood. Woo-woo. Master, your disciple is becoming more and more fond of you. What should we do? After saying that, Jaina immediately offered artificial respiration. Duque accepted it calmly and handed the mass-produced Focusing Rainbow to Jaina. This thing is for you to protect yourself. Although it can be mass-produced, it's best not to use it. After all, the material of this thing was too bad. Anyway, you know it's related to the Blue Dragon's body. Jaina stuck out her tongue. Was this considered as no trade, no killing? After making arrangements with Jaina, Duque passed through the portal and went directly to Dawn Island in the middle of Lordamere Lake. As soon as he stepped out of the portal, Duque saw that Vasht was already in the form of a Naga, waiting respectfully with a group of subordinates. On the shore, there was the giant water elemental Lord Unstable Hydas, the male Naga Deepwater Lord Karathres, and the deep-sea giant Meroger Tidewalker. In the deep water a little further from the shore, there was the huge island-like fish-shaped monster Jisro with most of its body exposed. They were all the bosses in Draenor's Serpent Temple back then. Now that their fate had changed, they had followed Vasht and become the vassal forces of the Alliance. Looking out, the elite Naga guards and Naga priests were lined up densely in the distance. Further away there were countless Murlocs. These guys, who used to quarrel all day, were all quietly crawling in front of Duque. Sometimes, Duque couldn't help but sigh that fate made fools of people. However, it was because of Duque's constant stirring up trouble that those forces that were originally destroyed and the bosses that were destined to step into death were all pulled back to become his subordinates. This was why the Alliance was strong and prosperous today. In the future, when fighting against the Burning Legion that came again, they would have more confidence. Duque took a deep breath. Although he was already a demigod, and breathing was just an action that could not be done, he always retained the habits of being a human. Duque believed that only humans were the true saviors of this world. He spat out the foul air in his lungs and said loudly, "Everyone from the Storm Naga, I have saved you from death. I have given you a future and hope. But this is not without conditions. I think you know what I am here to do today? The Deepwater Lord Carathres took the lead, knelt on one knee and shouted, I am willing to die for Master Duke Marcus. All the lords, all the elites and thousands of aquatic powerhouses knelt down in unison. I am willing to die for Master Duke Marcus. Death was not just a simple fanaticism. In a sense, this was a more transcendent existence, a more ideal destination. Every single one of them had personally witnessed how the dead humans and powerful creatures had fused with the weave and become immortal existences. For example, the frost dragon Sapphiron, the Archbishop of Holy Light Alonso's Fail, mortals and things would eventually die or decay. Being loyal to their own demigod Vashj and Vashj's master, Duque, was the true way of kings. Therefore, the loyalty of these aquatic powerhouses who had changed their name to Storm Naga was not false. Seeing the fanaticism in these guys' eyes, Duque was quite satisfied. Very good. Now the world has changed. The water elemental plane is the plane closest to Azeroth. I can feel that the water elemental Lord Tidehunter Neptulin did not personally participate in this world-destroying operation. He is destined to be a thorn in Netherio's side. Perhaps he will be in big trouble. Perhaps he wants to remain neutral, or he is purely acting according to circumstances. At this point, Duque paused, then continued, the Alliance needs to unite more powerhouses to fight against evil. What you have to do is to persuade him. Use words or force to persuade him to join this war against Netherio. Suddenly, the unstable Hedis asked in a muffled voice, what if he refuses? Chapter 1768. Was it another black and white issue? Duque had a slightly strange expression on his face. That's not important. If he refuses to participate in the war against Netherio, then make him hand over part of his water elemental authority to Vashj. Let Vashj fight in his place. I think if he was rescued from a desperate situation he would be very happy to do so. When Duque said this, all the members of the Storm Naga clan understood. They could not let the Tidehunters kneel, but if this coward refused to work, then they would squeeze him dry. Vashj swayed her snake tail and came in front of Duque. She crossed her 3 pairs of arms in front of her chest and bowed. My master Vashj will obey your orders. Duque did not say much, and Vashj also understood what Duque meant. Anyway, as long as Neptulin was not beaten into a dog, Vashj did not have to do anything. Duque pressed his hands on Vashj's shoulders, and Vashj's body suddenly trembled. After following Duque for so long, she of course knew that Duque did not like non-humanoid monsters. She was also disgusted with her Naga form. But she had no choice. If she did not appear in the form of a Naga, it would be difficult to convince the Nagas and sea monsters under her. Duque rarely touched her body in the Naga form. Duque was willing to press her slippery, scaly shoulders, largely because of what he was about to say next. I'm going back to Vashj. Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. The only part of Vashj's body that did not turn back into a Naga was her head. Her smooth white face leaned down and pressed against the back of Duque's right hand. She intimately rubbed it a few times. I am both Vashj and Master Saleya. Both of them are me. And it is because of Master that I did not go crazy during those long dark times. With the destruction of the Well of Eternity, the city of the High Elves, Vaskr, sank into the sea. Elven Queen Azhara and her High Elven followers could not escape this catastrophe. Although they escaped death, the price of their lives was Enzoth turning them into terrifying Naga sirens. Now, time had washed away the history of the High Elves. Many people had already forgotten this painful lesson. But Vashj was definitely an exception. Back then, the Lord of Vashjur's city had been her mother, Lasariel Vashjur. Because of her mother, she was able to enter the Azhara palace and serve Queen Azhara, becoming the queen's maid. After Vashjur sank to the bottom of the sea with Azhara city, Vashjur had been Vashjur's territory for the past 10,000 years. Until she led the Naga of her clan to seek refuge with Illidan. This time, following the Great Cataclysm, the water elemental plane and Azeroth's greatest overlap was Vashjur. This caused the water elemental in Vashjur to riot and produce a terrifying resonance. It passed through the abyss of the sea and reverberated throughout the world of Azeroth for a long time. To solve the problem of Vashjur, there was no one more suitable than Vashjur and her Storm Naga. Perhaps there had been other Naga clans who did not have eyes and came to take over, but as a demigod, everything would be easily solved. Through the almost non-existent plane barrier near Vashjur, they could reach the throat of the abyss. The throat of the abyss was an ocean located in the elemental plane. It was the source of all water elemental and the territory of the water elemental lord, Neptulin. It was constantly brewing and using waves and storms to attack the land that was surrounded by it. Normally, unless mortals relied on special methods, they would not be able to get close to this godforsaken place. The Naga were originally aquatic creatures, but it was different. Without a doubt, this was their backyard. Duque sent the storm Naga there so it was safe. Seleka, remember safety first. Yes. After saying goodbye softly, thousands of Naga and Murlocs jumped into the water under Vastur's lead. The entire sea was filled with bubbles from the rapid diving of these aquatic creatures. 10 minutes later, the entire island suddenly became empty. That was not entirely true. At least, the Murloc prophet Magar had stayed. As the leader of hundreds of thousands of Murlocs, he was already Vastur's other deputy, and his position was only below the Deepwater Lord, Carathres. Look after Lord Emir Lake. Understood, my master. Magar bowed deeply to Duque. A day later, in the deep sea northwest of Stormwind City, a huge army arrived at Vastur. Vastur swayed her snake tail and came to a seemingly ordinary high platform. She raised her hand and gently wiped off the thick moss on a stone tablet. If not for her actions, anyone would think that this stone tablet was an ordinary deep-sea stone. When she finished wiping the stone tablet, she was shocked to see that the stone tablet was written in the High Elven language. This tablet commemorates the benevolent leader, our beloved Lady Lisserel Vastur. For 100 years she has guided the people of the glimmering city Vastur into an era of endless prosperity. May she and her daughter, the dazzling Lady Vastur, continue to illuminate the way forward for our people in the darkness for the next 100 years. Vastur seemed to be muttering to herself. It was the Naga's special sound wave language underwater. My master. The one who truly illuminates the way forward in the darkness is you, not me. Vastur is my surname, not my name. My name. Forget it, from the day you saved me, I am Vastur Ubateria Vastur. Vastur smiled gracefully, and then there was no trace of a smile on her face. She raised her trident high and pointed it forward. Storm Naga. Attack, destroy all who resist. The queen's clear voice spread throughout the dark underwater world. Beside her, Carathres, who was even more burly, raised his weapon. Attack, destroy all who resist. Tell those thieves who is Vastur's master. Attack. Thousands of voices responded. They converged into one, and then turned into an incomparably huge war machine, beginning to rush into every corner of the underwater city of Vastur. The surrounding water constantly fluctuated greatly. With the scouring of the underwater turbulence, there were red waves everywhere. Vastur was like this. Just like her current position, she did not participate in the battle. She stood on the triangular roof of the tallest temple in this underwater city, ostentatiously displaying her divine power fluctuations. She was declaring her ownership of this underwater city, and also longing for a challenger with enough weight to appear. Unfortunately, there was none. The one who occupied this place was merely a second-rate Naga clan. She did not even need to do anything. Yusler had already swallowed the guy whose name it did not even know into its stomach. Chapter 1769. Duque realized that he was actually a bit like a superstar, going to one show after another. In fact, Duque should be happy. His subordinates were strong and they did not have their own masters, but rather they had their own goals. Moreover, the emergence of more peerless powerhouses was a preview of the full-blown war when the Burning Legion invaded in the future. After all this time, Nisario, Al-Akir and Ragnaros had come together. 10 years ago, all three of them would have been big bosses that could destroy the world. If he were to gather all the elites together and defeat the enemies one by one like in the past, it would mean that he would let the other two go. Unfortunately, no matter which one he let go of, it would cause unimaginable destruction and destruction to Azeroth. Splitting up to fight against the enemy was already inevitable. No matter how reluctant Duque was, he had to start learning to let go. And the biggest difference from history was that the Alliance now had the capital to split up. When Duque rushed to Silvermoon City, he happened to run into the elves' farewell party for Queen Sylvanas. This time, Sylvanas' target was the Wind Elemental Lord, Al-Akir. Just as Sylvanas was about to push open the door to the farewell party hall, Duque arrived. Yo Duque. We sisters almost thought that the three of us combined couldn't compare to your maid. Queen Sylvanas teased Duque. That's right. At this moment, beside Queen Sylvanas were Aurelia and Sasha, who were dressed in military attire and ready to go to war. The three Windrunner sisters had not gone to war for a long time. He had to admit that the physique of the elves was against the rules. After Aurelia and Sasha gave birth to a daughter, not only did their figure not change, but their breasts were also a grade bigger. Seeing this, the other women around Duke were all envious and jealous. Duque was drooling. Unfortunately, women like the three Windrunner sisters were destined to put the survival of the world as their top priority. They were leading by example, shouldering the future of the entire elven race with their seemingly thin and weak shoulders. Even though Duque didn't think that they were the kind of wife and loving mother he knew from the first day he started dating them, his daughter wasn't even a year old yet, and they had already chosen to fight. This kind of courage. Should he say that it was no wonder their surname was Windrunner? Duque shrugged in the face of Queen Syriana's teasing. Then he went over to each of them and gave them a hug and a kiss. After a long kiss, Aurelia raised her eyebrows and smiled. How surprising. I thought you would use her as an excuse to stop me. Your name is Windrunner, not Canary. When I first met you, I seemed to see a high-spirited warhorse that was eager to enter the battlefield. Why did I have to bind a gust of wind if it was foolish? I'm already very sorry that I've used my child to hold you back for 2 years. Humph. It's good that you know. Sasha pouted. She looked very cute when she was angry. Duque, don't you have anything to tell us? Queen Syriana asked with her arms akimbo and her chest puffed out. Don't be stopped by trash like Alakir. Back then, Sargeras had defeated all the ancient gods and elemental lords. And our future enemy is destined to be Sargeras, who has returned from the bottomless abyss. Duque wasn't looking down on the enemy, but it was a disguised form of encouragement. Alakir was strong, but he wasn't the final destination of the three Windrunner sisters. He was just a mountain that they would pass by. Only Sargeras was the real destination that everyone had to work hard to cross. The three Windrunner sisters said in unison, "We understand." Queen Syriana held Duque's arm as they walked out of the farewell hall. In the past, countless elves used to look at Duque with envy and even hatred as he was the man who had taken away their queen's body and mind. However, as Duque became a demigod, all the jealousy and hatred disappeared, and all that was left was admiration. That kind of formulaic speech couldn't attract Duque's attention. Although the elves were applauding and cheering for Queen Syriana's speech, Duque's mind had already flown to the southernmost part of the Tanaris Desert, Uldum. There were a total of 3 Titan bases on planet Azeroth. The other 2 were Uldaman in the Barren Land, and Ulder in Northrend's Storm Peak. Mortals knew the most about Uldaman. It was the place where the Titans created the ancestors of the dwarves, Rockjaws, and Earth Spirits. It was because the Earth Spirits were cursed with flesh and blood that the dwarves of today came into being. Otter was the place where the Titans left the Guardians on the continent of Azeroth lived. It was once filled with the Storm Giants and their slaves, the Crystal Puppets. It was also dominated by the ancient god Yogg-Saron. With the battle of the allied forces, Ulder had been liberated. Even the Guardian Dragons and the Titan Guardians knew very little about Ulder. With the consent of the Guardian Tarim, the leader of the Alliance was able to ask Ulder's central computer again. According to Ulder's records, it was confirmed that Ulder used to be the Titans' climate research center in the world of Azeroth, and perhaps it still was. It might still contain the blueprints of the Titans' transformation of the world, including mountains, rivers, seas, and all kinds of creatures. Before the Cataclysm, the Titans set up an extremely complicated and powerful Titan barrier for the entire Ulder. Even the Titan Guardians themselves could not enter it. But with the collapse of the Azeroth elemental barrier, Ulder became accessible for the first time in 25,000 years. For Nesario, who was keen on creating new species of dragons such as the Twilight Dragon, there was mysterious information he could not refuse. There were a total of 3 core areas in Ulder. One was the Hall of Origins, that had mastered the mysterious power of the Titans. Due to Duque's special instructions, the archaeological team belonging to Bulang Bronzebeard had gone deep into the Hall of Origins of Ulder as soon as possible after the Cataclysm. According to the preliminary reports, this pyramid covered in sand and gravel was a place that archaeologists dreamed of. Precious ancient relics and terrifying automatic defense systems could be seen everywhere. But according to the ancient language on the stone tablets discovered at this stage, archaeologists suddenly discovered that there was an even more important treasure hidden in these halls. A secret that could threaten the entire Azeroth, a weapon of mass destruction that could recreate all life in Azeroth. The leaders of the Alliance believed that the invaders of Ulder, led by Nesario, obviously knew this secret and hoped to use this treasure as a weapon. Finding and protecting the Hall of Origins was no longer just an academic need. Chapter 1770. Therefore, Brian Bronzebeard, Illyria, Riadaline, Hadgeron Brightwing, and Millhouse Mana Storm would be in charge of the path in the Hall of Origins. These 5 hero-level powerhouses were Brian Bronzebeard, Illyria, Riadaline, Hadgeron Brightwing, and Millhouse. In the Uldum region there was also a new race, the Catmen. During the creation of the world, the Titans also created a mysterious race, the Catmen, Torville. They were used to guard the Titans' research facility in Uldum, and Torville's lost city was where they once lived and fought. But with the appearance of the wind elemental plane, Torville, which was the closest to them, naturally became their first target to conquer the world. The main opponents in the Torville dungeon were the Catmen General and the spiritual leader, but the final opponent was the culprit sent by the wind elemental lord to bewitch the Torvilles, Hiamat. Torville's lost city was the stronghold of Nephiselt. Nephiselt was one of the Catmen Torvilles, and the flesh curse had turned their stone skin into flesh. In fact, almost as soon as the cataclysm happened, Deathwing's forces infiltrated Uldum faster than the dwarven archaeologists. Torville swore allegiance to Deathwing in exchange for a chance to remove the flesh curse. After signing a dark contract with Deathwing and his army, Nephiselt Torville, who had regained their stone skin, retreated to their ancient capital, the lost city, in the Venel River Delta, and continued to threaten the entire Uldum. However, after the curse was lifted, the gang of Torwills turned around to bite back at their benefactor. Even so, because Nephiselt had already signed a dark contract, the distortion and malice in them could never be removed. The lost city was easy to defend and difficult to attack. The periphery was surrounded by steep mountains and swamps filled with crocodiles. Even if there was no garrison in the city, it was difficult to invade. What was worse was that the commander of Nephiselt was Lord Southwind, Hiamat, who had given them new power. She was one of the most powerful servants under Deathwing and Alakir. Even though he was a powerful enemy and an unshakable general, the fact that Hiamat appeared in the lost city might also be an opportunity. After strengthening a large number of troops and corrupting Nephiselt, he did not have much power left. A truly powerful team of heroes might be able to sneak into the city and assassinate Lord Southwind before he recovered his power. This task was given to Sasha. She would team up with Merid, Vanessa, Sally Whitemane, and Solarian, the great astrologer, in order to complete the mission quickly. The teams formed by these two groups of heroes were just side divisions. Their main force was still dealing with the wind elemental Lord Alakir. If Alakir was at his peak, Duque wouldn't have dared to let Queen Sylvie face him. In fact, after the World War 25,000 years ago, whether it was the four great ancient gods or the four elemental lords, after they died once, they were no longer as brave as they were in the past. Thus, Duque sent out Servanas, Gavin Rad, and Stormwarden Amaron. The three of them would head straight for the Wind God throne located in the void southwest of Uldum. In the past, the Wind God throne only existed in the Wind Elemental Plane. It was the lair of the Wind Elemental Lord Alakir, floating high in the endless sky wall. Now, the barrier of the Elemental Plane had been broken. In order to prevent Alakir from wandering freely in the Wind of Azeroth, it was a good idea to take the initiative to attack. Otherwise, when Alakir tamed all the winds in the southern sky of Kalimdor and gathered the fiercest storm, it would be too late. His appetite couldn't be too small. Obviously, cleansing all life in Uldum and occupying the mysterious Titan creation, the Hall of Origins, would only be his starting point. When he and Ragnaros each controlled all the wind and fire elements in Azeroth, that would be the real world-destroying cataclysm. Even without Nesario, who controlled the earth elements taking action, they alone could destroy all the creatures in Azeroth. Flames burned everything. Strong winds suffocated all living things. Duque had already tested it. In this fantasy world, the wind element was a special element that included air. Taking away the wind element would also mean taking away the air. Any creature that had to breathe was dead. Strong winds alone weren't enough. After all, there were things like the Undying and ghosts in this world. Don't forget that there were also flames. If Ragnaros really attacked without limit, even the Undying would be finished. Duque let out a long sigh of relief. While he was thinking, Queen Sylvanas had also completed the declaration before the expedition. After all, it was not an expedition of an army, and there was no grand military parade. After Queen Sylvanas announced the various appointments, she once again appointed Theron as the regent and officially set off. In front of hundreds of elves, Sylvanas gave a hot kiss without hesitation. "Don't worry, my dear. I'll deal with Alakir and come back to give birth." Duque grimaced and lamented in his heart, "Son, or rather daughter, you have a mother who dares to fight and fight. I really don't know if you're lucky or unlucky." What else could Duque say to such a tough Queen Sylvanas? He could only roll his eyes. It's good to get it done before the Burning Legion fully invades. Those who had stepped into the divine realm were so capricious. As long as they were given enough divinity and energy, giving birth was more like a process of splitting elements or powers. Duque estimated that Queen Sylvanas did not even have to suffer the pain of childbirth and could directly give birth without pain. Other women probably wouldn't be able to enjoy such a 666 method. The women of the Windrunner family had always been swift and decisive. They did not have too many romantic feelings and did what they had to do. During peacetime, when they were bored, perhaps they could roll in bed with Duque every day. Even as a queen, they could completely unlock all the positions. Once they entered the war, these gentle, beautiful, and sexy female elves would transform into the most heroic rangers and fight on the front line against evil. Without looking back, they stepped into the portal that Duque opened and went to meet Gavin, Rad, and the others. Duque sighed softly and then bitterly rushed to the next battle, Teldrassil. This was because another traitor had finally surfaced. In the third battle and the Battle of Hyjal, the Night Elves lost their world tree Nordrassil and thus their immortality. The generous Night Elves could accept this fact. However, the human heart was always the most complicated thing. Once you had it, you would not be willing to lose it. Under such circumstances, Fandral Staghelm convinced the other Night Elves and finally united with the Druids to create a new world tree, Teldrassil. Chapter 1771. Originally, Fandral did not have the final say in the Cenarian Circle. Unfortunately, Malfurion, who could keep Fandral in check, entered the Emerald Dream after the Battle of Mount Hyjal. No one knew the reason and no one knew how to wake him up again. Naturally, Fandral replaced him and became the Archdruid. Without Malfurion's interference, Fandral could do whatever he wanted. Since ancient times, the Druids and the Cenarian Circle formed by the Druids had never been under the jurisdiction of the royal authority or any other regime. Even though Tyrande was the spokesperson of the divine authority among the Night Elves and held the highest authority among the Night Elves, she had no right to stop Fandral's actions. Without Malfurion, the only one who had the ability to stop Fandral was the former Druid mentor, the halfling Cenarius. Coincidentally, Grom had chopped the shit out of him with his axe. Moreover, most of the Night Elves yearned for immortality again. Tyrande could only acquiesce. However, even though the New World Tree grew rapidly and the incomparably gigantic thickets could be seen from the northern coast of Calendar, the Night Elves settled down here and began to build their first new city in thousands of years. All of this was not as perfect as Fandral had imagined. The Night Elves did not regain the ability to live forever. It was very simple. Teldrassil did not receive the blessings from the Dragon Kings like Nordrassil. After all, Alexstras's blessing was to protect the safety of the Well of Eternity. Now the new Well of Eternity had exploded. The cruel reality had proven that the Night Elves did not have the ability to protect the Well of Eternity alone, and there was no need to protect the new Well of Eternity. Therefore, there was no need to renew the benefits of immortality for the Night Elves. As a result, Teldrassil began to gradually decay. Satyrs, inferior demons, and other monsters also began to treat this place as their home. After Duque sent Queen Sylvanas off, Duque received a message from Tyrande. As soon as Duque stepped out of the portal in the Elune Temple, Tyrande came to greet him. Dressed in a moon-white priestess robe, Tyrande looked so holy. At this moment she was the most devout priestess of the goddess. The signs you spoke of have indeed appeared. Tyrande looked worried. Fandral has summoned many druids to Teldrassil in preparation for the plan to heal the World Tree. Navarax, Brawl Bearskin, Hamel Runtotem and other great druids have all received his summons. He summoned the druids in the name of the Cenarian Council's chairman. I feel that there is something wrong, but I have no right to stop him. You said that when this happens, I have to inform you immediately. As one of William's trio, Brawl was the chief druid of the Alliance's hero group, so there was no need to introduce him. Navarax had long ago druid of druids of. Long before Sar led the orcs west to the Kalimdor continent, a group of claw druids discovered a complex underground cave in the heart of the Barren Lands. At that time, as the leader of this group of druids, Night Elf Navarax firmly believed that as long as he could connect to the Emerald Dream in the cave, he could transfer the energy of the dream to the spring in the cave and restore the Barren Lands to its former glory. However, Navarax's imagination had unfortunately turned into a nightmare, and the Howling Caves had also changed. There were venomous snakes, velociraptors, wind snakes and crocodiles everywhere. The springs and crevices had also rotted. In a sense, this guy was a troublemaker with good intentions. Hammer Runtotem was the chief of the Tauren Runtotem family, the disciple of Malfurion Stormrage, and the advisor of Cairn Bloodhoof. In the future he would also become the advisor of Cairn's son, Smash Bane. He was also the first non-dream elf druid to receive the title of Great Druid. Although Hammer was not the first Tauren druid, He was indeed the first Tauren druid to regain the way of nature. Fandral had summoned so many great druids in one go. Duque gently stroked Tyron's green hair. Don't worry, you did well. It's time to deal with Fandral's Staghelm. Please call the core members of the Elun Sisterhood, Chandri's Feathermoon, and other important elven generals. Also, be prepared to communicate with Elun at any time. Come with me. Tyrant immediately realized that the situation was far more serious than she had imagined. Duque must have sensed something. Can you tell me who the enemy is this time? Tyrant asked with a straight face. The King of Nightmares, Savis. Upon hearing this name, Tyrant could not help but reminisce about the darkest times. In a sense, it was Savis who had followed Queen Azhara's orders to seek a higher level of power and life in the universe. That was how he had formed a connection with the Burning Legion, and that ancient war that could be said to be a catastrophe for the entire planet of Azeroth. However, Savis, the Night Elves' known sycophant, had finally escaped and obtained a new life under the hands of the ancient god Enzos. He became the virus, cancer, mastermind and culprit that invaded the Emerald Dream. For the past 10,000 years, Isra, who monitored and controlled the Emerald Dream, had always hoped to catch him, but to no avail. He was too cunning, and almost no matter what he did not reveal his true form. No matter what methods Isra used to ambush or lure him, the most he could do was capture some of the fragments of his will. However, he used the unreal nature of the Emerald Dream to continuously infiltrate the dreams of the Guardians of the Emerald Dream, invading and corroding the Green Dragons. Not long ago, a large number of ancient dragons had almost fallen from the Emerald Dragon army. For example, after the Molten Core, there had almost been a repeat of the 4 great green dragons that had fallen. If not for Duque's warning to Isra, the Green Dragon army would have lost a few ancient dragons that could fight. Hearing Savis's name, Tyrant's expression turned ugly. I think we need to find a way to wake Malfurion up. This had nothing to do with personal feelings. It was purely because Malfurion, who controlled the power of the Emerald Dream, was an ideal candidate to fight against Savis. Tyrant bit her lip and seemed to hesitate but still said, Duque, don't you know soul magic? I agree with you using it on Malfurion. Duque shook his head. It has nothing to do with that. I already know that Malfurion fell into a deep sleep because he was trapped by the nightmares of the King of Nightmares. He has been having nightmares for the past few years. I have already solved this riddle. All that's left is to wait for the actors to arrive. Tyrant's eyes widened. Chapter 1772. The reason why the snitches could cause such devastating destruction was because they stirred up trouble from the inside. The strongest fortress was always breached from the inside. As the most unreasonable one-step transmigrator, he was best at beating up the snitches. From Kel Thuzad, who was still a human during the Second Dark Portal War, to Benedicta's who had just been exposed, to Fandral's Staghelm. 3 hours later, the great druids of the Cenarian Circle gathered below the World Tree, Teldrassil. Fandral's Staghelm was making a speech. The World Tree is the glory of Kadorii. It is the legacy that Kadorii lives on. Without the World Tree, Kadorii is not even worthy of being called Kadorii. Look, Teldrassil is drying up and more cracks appear on the trunk. As the protectors and coordinators of nature, can we sit back and watch this happen? Fandral waved his hand and made a sweeping gesture. No. We can't sit back and watch this happen. With that, he raised a statue that had 4 legs and was in the shape of a centaur, but its body was decorated with many leaves. As the chairman of the Cenarian Circle, I formally propose a motion to use the statue of Remulos to heal the World Tree. Remulos was the son of the demigod Cenarius. After the death of Cenarius, he became the protector of the Moonlight Woodland. Despite the war, this sacred land still preserved its innocence. As the former home of the demigod Cenarius, the Moonlight Woodland bathed in eternal moonlight. After the destruction of the Well of Eternity in the Third Dark Portal War, the Night Elves were blessed by Elun and built a home for the druids here. The Moonlight Woodland once again became a safe harbor for the elves. Most of the Night Elves who did not move to Teldrassil stayed in the Moonlight Woodland, which was surrounded by ancient forest trees and had almost no contact with other races in the outside world. After Malfurion fell into a deep sleep, Remulos provided a lot of help to the young druids. As the son of a demigod, a creature with a powerful divinity, and the symbol of the new generation of druids, Remulos had a very high reputation among the druids. For a moment there was a lot of agreement around. The lower and middle druids thought it was a good idea, but the archdruids instinctively felt that something was wrong. Brawl Baremantle was the first to speak. No one can deny that Teldrassil is a miracle of the world. It is a magnificent natural landscape created by us druids through the magic of Azeroth itself. But even such a huge tree had to go through life and death like any other living thing. However, Teldrassil is abnormally sick in his prime. It's not malnutrition or physical damage but sickness. This is very abnormal. I think we need to find the cause first instead of using magic to cure it. Brawl's words were pertinent and reasonable. But his argument was immediately rejected by Fandral. Teldrassil is withering, it needs more nutrients. We used magic to hasten its growth, so we should give it more magic. As long as its body is strong enough, it can ignore all pests and diseases. Fandral's high-sounding argument was refuted by a sharp female voice. Just like how you poisoned Malfurion with morning wheat, while claiming that you were going to rescue him? To be as shameless as you are, you must be one of the best among traitors. The one who spoke was naturally Tyrant Whisperwind, the highest leader of the Night Elves and the spokesperson of the moon goddess Elun. These words caused an uproar among the druids. What was going on? This was no longer a quarrel but a fight to the death. A fight to the death. Ever since the Elun Sisterhood and the druids seized power from Queen Azhara 10,000 years ago, the Night Elves had been in a parallel political system that had nothing to do with each other. The moon goddess belonged to the moon goddess, and the druids belonged to the druids. Although their doctrines were similar and their origins were the same, the bosses were actually different. The Elun Sisterhood was a typical divine path, and the will of Elun was absolute. The druid doctrine was based on the harmony of nature, and even the founder of the religion, Cenarius, was only the highest teacher, not the ruler. The two factions respected and helped each other, and this was how they had been for the past 10,000 years. Now that Tyrant had suddenly launched an attack, if there was no concrete evidence, it might cause a civil war among the Night Elves. The druids saw that Tyrant had not only brought Duke Marcus, the higher-ups of the Elun Sisterhood, Chandri's Feathermoon and other generals, she had also brought over 1,000 sentries from the moon goddess temple. Just this was enough to cause them to be in an uproar. High Priest Whisperwind, please be careful with your words. May I ask, do you have concrete evidence? Navarax shouted on the spot. Of course I do. The evidence is this, morning wheat. Tyrant tossed a large bag into the distance. This, such bright natural energy, there's no problem. Navarax sensed it. Tyrant laughed coldly. Of course there's no problem if you didn't use the Emerald Dream to send your soul into this bag of wheat. At this moment Fandral's expression finally changed. Nonsense. Is that so? Malfurion is in a deep sleep because he was ambushed by the King of Nightmares, Savis, in the Emerald Dream and is trapped in a nightmare cage. Tyrant held the bow in her left hand, extremely agitated. She was already beyond angry. Her impassioned voice suddenly rose an octave. Fandral, you ordered the druids to collect large amounts of morning wheat in order to create a cursed poison to sprinkle on Malfurion's sleeping body. If not for the moon goddess temple's priests taking care of him, I'm afraid that even if Malfurion escaped from the King of Nightmares, he would not have a body to return to. At this moment Duque spoke. Of course Fandral, you can say that there was a traitor among the druids who collected the morning wheat, and he was bribed by the King of Nightmares to add poison. But who is in the right and who is in the wrong? Just find an archdruid to sink into the Emerald Dream to find out. Not only do you check the morning wheat, but also carefully listen to Teldrassil's voice. Hearing Duque and Tyrant's words, the druids began to waver. They were right. As long as an archdruid sank his soul into the Emerald Dream, all the mysteries would be revealed. The three archdruids, Brawl, Navarax and Runtotem, looked at each other and made a decision on the spot. Brawl said, I'm better at fighting. I'll protect you. Navarax smiled bitterly, I failed once in the Howling Caves. I'll forget about it this time. I'll do it. The Minotaur druid Hamuel smiled bitterly. Chapter 1773. The situation had taken a sharp turn for the worse for Fandral. The druids had not been so sensitive before the incident with Benedictus. If someone else had been in charge, the druids' subconscious xenophobia would have kicked in. Duque was different. For more than 20 years, Duque had the nickname of Eye of Light among the higher-ups of the Alliance. It described Duque's ability to distinguish between good and bad, and to find the traitor directly. The most famous and earliest were the ones who discovered that Sargeras had possessed Medivh. Then they found Nesario, who had used the ultimate transformation spell to become the Lord of Presto. Then it was Onyxia, and most recently, it was the Archbishop of the Stormwind Kingdom, Benedictus. As long as they were a traitor, they would not be able to stay for long without being caught by Duke. Or rather, it was not that the time had not come. When Duque arrived, the Druids had actually believed most of it. Not only did they not continue to cluster around Fandrel's Staghelm, but they also spread out to form an encirclement to prevent Staghelm from making a move. What they lacked now was the most decisive evidence. At this point in time, Fandrel panicked. If it was someone else, they might have wet their pants. Whether or not he was the acting chairman of the Cenarian Circle, Duque was a true demigod and the Alliance's commander. He was Alexstrasza, whom the Night Elves worshipped like a true god, often bragged and shamelessly asked Elun to borrow a high priest to warm his bed. No matter how Staghelm tried to stay calm, he was still panicking. It was completely different from the plan that he had agreed with Savis. This was no longer just making a mess, it was simply piercing the sky. Duke Marcus, you are the enemy of nature. The butcher who abused magic to destroy nature. What do you mean by slandering me like this? Even if the wheat is poisonous, it's because I didn't notice. The same goes for Teldrassil. We can't find a way to cure the world tree and we're just working together. What right do you have to slander me? And I have no reason to do so. Fandrel insisted that Duque was slandering him and argued loudly. Yes, he doesn't have a motive, right? The Druids were confused. Duke's mouth spat out only one name, Vartan. In an instant all the elves understood. Fandrel Staghelm was not only a well-known archdruid, but also a famous son lover. Fandrel's wife died in childbirth, so he loved his son Velastin dearly. When his son was almost 1,000 years old, he still broke the door guard for his son, telling him to go home at 9 o'clock every night. It was like holding it in his hands and not letting it go, holding it in his palms yet afraid of melting. It wasn't easy for Valston to live up to his expectations. He had displayed his independent temperament in various occasions and had even given birth to a granddaughter for him. It was only then that he could relax a little. Unfortunately, during the War of the Shifting Sands in Silithus 1,000 years ago, Staghelm's father and son fought side by side in an attempt to restrain the insectoid army that invaded Silithus. The mutant insects continued to pour out of the Karaj fortress to support the insect army at the front. All of Silithus was surrounded. Fandrel made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. He sent the young Valston to guard the Night Elf outpost in Southwind Village. Unfortunately, Valston died when Southwind Village was attacked by the Karaj army. Fandrel Staghelm was filled with regret. Even many years after his son's death, the Druids could still hear Fandrel crying at night for his son. Grief and pain had changed Fandrel's character, perhaps even more than that. Since Valston's death, he made many tough decisions, and his actions became more and more hasty and arbitrary. Since a few hundred years ago, he did not allow anyone to question his decisions. Many Night Elves saw this as a sign of his confidence, but some thought that he was too arrogant. Fandrel himself did not care about what others thought, unless that person was in his way. Everyone knew that in the past 1,000 years, he had been looking for ways to resurrect his son in various ways. In fact, because Duque accepted the Karaj insectoids as his slaves, Fandrel was even more furious. He even encouraged the entire Cenarian Circle to pressure Duque to execute all the insectoids. However, none of the archdruids were willing to support him, and Tyrant had suppressed this matter. Now, everything Duke and Fandrel had done was for the sake of their dead son, Valston. The druids were shocked, but in their hearts they immediately accepted this explanation. Duke Marcus, are you humiliating my son who sacrificed himself for my people and for the peace of Kalimdor? I can't accept this. Fandrel took half a step back, still trying to defend himself. It was very simple because there was no evidence left behind for what he did. He did not believe that Duque, who had nothing to do with him, could see what happened in his dream. Duque was indeed powerful. Obviously, the dream was not Duque's domain. Duque laughed coldly. Many of you only know that under Nozdormu's request, I returned to the ancient war 10,000 years ago for the balance of history. Probably not many people know that not only did I convert Archimonde's shadow curse, I also obtained shadow force, which I used to enter the Burning Legion. I even commanded Savis as a Void Lord, didn't I? The King of Nightmares, Savis? This almost taboo name suddenly made all the druids' nerves sensitive. In the eyes of outsiders, the Cenarian Circle's druids in the past 10,000 years seemed to be fighting with the air. Only the druids who had truly entered the Emerald Dream knew how terrifying and dangerous the nightmares in the dream world were. The only name that could not be avoided was Savis. Duque continued, I have mastered the ability to control souls, and I have also memorized Savi's soul undulations. I didn't feel it before, but now that I see you, I can immediately sense that you are covered in that guy's disgusting stench. This time, Fandrel's expression finally changed. That's right. Although he had served Savi's in the past, he had never completely accepted Savi's power of nightmares like this. A long time ago, when Fandrel was searching for a way to resurrect his son, he was entangled by a nightmare. However, the nightmare did not torture him. Instead, it told him that there was a way to resurrect Volston. Fandrel, who was crazy about his son, of course immediately accepted the King of Nightmares' help and request. He lured Malfurion into the dream to investigate and was trapped in the dream. Then he persuaded the council to plant a second world tree, and secretly planted part of the King of Nightmares' essence on Teldrassil, cursing the tree from the beginning. Chapter 1774. From then on, the King of Nightmares controlled part of the World Tree's power and could use Teldrassil's connection to the world to carry out a series of spreading operations. The King of Nightmares, of course, gave Fandrel a new son after Fandrel made these contributions. One of the King of Nightmares transformed into Volston, and at the same time read Fandrel's dream, making this son look exactly like Fandrel. Fandrel had always hidden this son well and let the fake Volston act as a bridge between him and the King of Nightmares. This time, the King of Nightmares was ready to invade Azeroth. The fake Volston sent an order. Fandrel was to gather all the druids around the World Tree to prevent them from discovering the Nightmares' next attack plan. Then, Fandrel was to lead these druids to use a method that looked like treatment, but was actually poisoning the World Tree to deepen the disease. If this was in the original history, a terrible event would have erupted and spread throughout the entire Azeroth continent. Everywhere in the world, regardless of race, everyone began to fall into endless nightmares. Whether it was Kalimdor or the people of the Eastern Kingdom, they all began to fall into a deep sleep and had nightmares. Only a few people with strong willpower were able to avoid falling into a deep sleep. This directly bought more time for the Wing of Death's conspiracy. Coincidentally, at this time, the Tauren druid Hamuel sank into the Emerald Dream and heard Teldrassil's call for help. Moreover, Fandrel had the insight that Hammer had discovered his secret and ambushed this noble druid. Originally, it should have been an evenly matched battle between the druids, but Fandrel had obtained the power given to him by the King of Nightmares. In addition, he had extracted the power of the fallen World Tree, so he defeated Hamuel and imprisoned him, preparing to corrupt him to become the minion of another King of Nightmares. However, in this life, Fandrel did not have the chance to further poison Teldrassil. Just as Fandrel was about to completely fall, Duque directly rushed out to confront Fandrel. In fact, when Duque said that he had recently discovered the smell of Savi's on Fandrel, Tyrant also questioned Duque why he did not tell her immediately. Duque replied, "The soul and will of intelligent creatures are the most complicated things in the world. There is seldom absolute light or the most complete darkness. The souls of most intelligent creatures were in a state of confusion that was a mixture of righteousness and evil. We can't destroy them just because they have some evil thoughts." This logic was just like when Duque was in school, a bunch of animals clamored to push Sister Bing Bing down. Then he heard a group of dinosaurs shouting that they wanted to push down their Adonis. Thinking is one thing, doing is another. Fandrel's actions over the years were extreme, but his soul had not really fallen. His obsession with smashing was something that no one could resolve. Tyrant fell silent at Duque's explanation, and instead gave an example. "Just like how I'm loyal to the public and willing to sacrifice everything for Caldorii, but you've shamelessly unlocked all my postures in secret?" Duque clenched his teeth and didn't dare to continue. Returning to this moment, since Duque dared to throw out the name of the King of Nightmares, Savi's, he naturally had an even greater trump card. "Fandrel, I'm so disappointed in you." A voice familiar to the druids sounded, and Malfurion Stormrage, the true leader of the Cenarian Circle who seemed to be covered in grass and had antlers on his head, appeared behind Tyrant and the rest. The team naturally made way for the spiritual leader of the Night Elves to enter. Malfurion leaned on his staff and rushed over with large strides. "Hamuel, there's no need to go to the Emerald Dream. I've already contacted Teldrassil and it told me all the reasons. As for you, Fandrel." Malfurion turned to look at Fandrel's staghelm. There was anger in his eyes, but even more sorrow and pain. Obviously, he had never thought that Fandrel, whom he had personally nurtured, would fall to such a state. Fandrel finally lost his composure. He turned pale with fright and blurted out, "No? Impossible. How could you break free from the King of Nightmares' cage?" Duque sneered, "Huh? You knew that Malfurion was trapped in the King of Nightmares' cage, and yet you still let Morning Weed up? Are you not going to continue pretending?" "Pretending? Continue pretending. Duque originally wanted to retort, but Tyrant quietly tugged at his sleeve and shook her head almost imperceptibly. It's enough that you were able to rescue Malfurion in time. Duque immediately relented. Actually, rescuing Malfurion was a small accident. When Duque rushed over and informed Tyrant of Malfurion's problem, he went to see Malfurion. As someone who had once been part of the Burning Legion, Duque was very sensitive to soul fluctuations. Under the system notification, he received a message from a nightmare. Although Malfurion was imprisoned by the King of Nightmares, he also used the power of nightmares as a hint to inform Duque of the most important person's name. That person was the wielder of the orc hero Brock's magic battle axe, Sora Salyafar. This female orc was Brock Salyafar's niece. Years ago, when Cenarius was killed by Lord Howl, the divine weapon that he had personally forged using oak trees and was blessed by the moon god eventually fell into the hands of this female orc as a spoil of war. And this weapon was the key to destroying the King of Nightmares' cage. The rest was only natural. Duque asked Tyrant to bypass Brainless Howl and contact Wajin in private. Wajin, who was struggling to maintain a friendly relationship with the Alliance, immediately agreed to let Sora, who was not valued by Brainless Howl, make the trip. At this moment, Malfurion happened to arrive at the perfect moment. Fandral, are you still going to be stubborn? Give up on your damned plan. What bullsh***, T King of Nightmares, Savi's is a liar. There's no way he can resurrect your son. Malfurion shouted with every drop of air in his lungs. Fandral Staghelm's face showed a sorrowful expression, but it was unknown why he was sorrowful. It's too late. Malfurion, and I'm willing to pay any price for my Volston. With a wave of his hand, the famous druid's hands suddenly glowed with an illusory black light. In the blink of an eye, thousands of translucent nightmare minions with twisted limbs and tentacles jumped out of thin air and began to attack all living beings present. Malfurion turned his head to look at Tyrant, who was standing beside Duque, and then turned his gaze to Duque. Next, it's a matter between master and disciple. Duque, do you agree? I agree. Chapter 1775. The reason why the alliance was an alliance was because all the allied countries and races were equal. This was written in a charter that hung high above the headquarters of the alliance in Stormwind City. One could see it as soon as they entered. To this day, the throne hall was not a fixed place. Almost every kingdom in the alliance had a hall with many thrones. Wherever the leaders of the alliance gathered, it was called the throne hall. It was at that moment but not after it was gone. Every hall would definitely have this charter hanging on the wall. This represented equality and the respect between countries. If it was the Empire, Duque could just bring people to capture Fandral and beat him up. There would be no need for so much trouble. It was because he respected the traditions of the Night Elves, as well as the entanglement of politics and religion, that Duque patiently confronted Fandral. On the other hand, he was giving Tyrant face. Duque was definitely happy to see Tyrant monopolizing power. After all, that would save him a lot of trouble. However, he did not want Tyrant to take all the power in the form of a tyrant. In fact, Malfurion was also involved in Fandral's incident. In this life, Tyrant did not choose Malfurion. In a sense, Malfurion's green card was real. Even if Duque succeeded, he still respected Tyrant. He had spent too little time with Tyrant. He could not compare to the Stormwind brothers. The two brothers were Tyrant's childhood sweethearts for more than 13,000 years. They would always have a special place in her heart. It was not appropriate to belittle or elevate them. Therefore, this time, Duque played the role of a quiet, handsome man and quietly watched the battle between master and disciple. There was no young Jingru in this world, and there was probably no big sister who gave him courage. Duque did not know where Fandral got his courage from, but he actually wanted to kill Malfurion in front of Duque and Tyrant. Corruption, grant me strength. Fandral's current posture was very similar to Archimonde's when he absorbed the vengeful souls of the world and prepared to use his ultimate move on Mount Hyjal. Unfortunately, the Ack brothers' graves were already 3 feet tall. Old man, don't learn from him, okay? Clearly, Fandral was absorbing the fallen power of the World Tree for his own use. The main point was that Duque had exposed Fandral's scheme in advance in this life, and the decay of the World Tree was much shallower than in the original history. That kind of superficial level of depravity power was not even worth mentioning. Duque saw that Fandral had not reached the demigod level after absorbing for a long time, and he began to yawn. Naturally, Malfurion and the others wouldn't keep Duque waiting. After all, this was a disgrace to the Cenarian Circle. If they couldn't handle it themselves and had to ask Duque to do it, not only would they lose face, they would also fall into a passive position politically. Obviously, Fandral would not give up without putting up a fight. He had summoned a nightmare monster the size of a villa. At least in terms of momentum, it was very scary. Such a huge, semi-illusory, black and even living tissue could not be counted. Anyway, a druid could not avoid a single one of its tentacles. The slightest touch would cause the druid to fall into a nightmare as if he was having an epileptic seizure and kept struggling on the ground. Have a taste of nature's wrath. Brawl and Hamuer exerted themselves to the limit, working together to create a green hat and put it on the nightmare monster's head. No one knew how it worked, but their attacks blocked the attacks of the nightmare monster's claws. Malfurion summoned the world tree, and there was still a lot of nature energy left to block Fandral's spells. At the same time, a green glow appeared on top of Malfurion's head and instantly gathered on the tips of his 2 antlers. Then he shot out a ray similar to moving deadlight. Swoosh! It seemed to have missed, but after the ray passed Fandral's body, it suddenly made a turn and shot into the void. The seemingly empty void suddenly cracked open, and an object with the appearance of a young night elf fell out of the void. Vastine? Fandral let out a scream. That's right, Malfurion's attack from the beginning was to cover up his real move, which was to directly attack the fake Vastine hiding behind Fandral. The druid's magic attack was not strong, but the magic of a great druid was still strong. Malfurion shattered the shadow creature that had taken the form of Volston. In the next second, this farcical betrayal ended because Fandral was a sun control freak. When he saw his son being beaten up, Fandral, who could not bear the thought of losing his beloved son for the second time, Fandral fainted on the spot because of the great psychological impact. Without the main brain, the nightmare monster's claws that attacked based on instinct were naturally no match for the druids. Duque, what about Isra? At this time, Malfurion finally thought of the possibility that the King of Nightmares' target was Isra. I'm fine. Since Duque reminded me, how could I be so stupid to fall into that trap? In the void, a green-haired woman with the appearance of an elf walked out. Although she was only a projection, the dragon horns on her head and the pair of eyes that almost never opened told everyone who she was. The Emerald Dragon King, Isra. When the druids all bowed to Isra, Isra nodded at Duque in gratitude. Thank you, Duque. That was indeed a very sinister trap. If not for your reminder, even I might have been trapped there. You're welcome. Duque said calmly, showing off the demeanor of a master. Tyron looked at Fandral, who had fainted on the ground. Malfurion, what about him? Malfurion looked up at the sky and sighed. Fandral? He was also tricked by the King of Nightmare. Strictly speaking, he is also a victim. Seeing that he did not cause too much damage, I have decided to imprison him in a prison in the Moonlight Woodland that is used to purify the soul until he regains consciousness. Although everyone present, including Malfurion himself, doubted whether Fandral could really recover, what he said was the truth. After all, after Malfurion's inspection, he found that the world tree was not seriously poisoned. The only one who was truly tricked by Fandral was Malfurion. Even the victim had given up on pursuing justice. What else could the others say? At the end of the day, this was the internal affairs of the Cenarian Circle. However, Duque made a request. I agree with the Cenarian Circle's method of handling things. However, I am worried about Staghelm's mental state. I heard that he has a granddaughter. Tyrant immediately understood what he meant. His daughter-in-law Rhaera and granddaughter, Astalia, live in the Night Elf territory of Grey Valley, Astrana. However, I will bring them to the Moon Goddess's temple. This, all right. Malfurion leaned on his staff and sighed. Chapter 1776. This was the check and balance, the so-called insurance. It was obvious that the Cenarian Circle made a big mess of this matter. The Moon Temple didn't take the opportunity to suppress the Cenarian Circle and didn't even take action against Duque, which was already giving the Cenarian Circle a lot of face. It would be insensible to refuse again. Only Duque knew that when Fandral was imprisoned in history, the Orc army attacked Grey Valley and burned Astrana to the ground. His granddaughter was also killed. Fandral, who had just woken up, was once again dealt a heavy blow. The grief of losing his beloved son and granddaughter directly caused Fandral to go crazy. All his madness was completely transformed into the flames of revenge. Under the lead of a traitor, he turned to the Fire Demon King. With the power of Ragnaros, he first reborn his daughter-in-law as the first fire druid in history, and he himself became the leader of the fire druids, replacing the position of Majordomo who died in history. Fandral would rather bury Azeroth with his own hands than live in this world that lost his beloved son. By doing this, Duque didn't know if he could pull this troublemaker back to the normal world one last time. Although he wasn't obligated to do this, at least he did his best. What happened next was nothing to write home about. Malfurion used magic to find the location of the King of Nightmares parasitizing the World Tree and worked together with all the other druids to completely eradicate it, freeing the World Tree from the corruption of nightmares. Isra, who had been notified early in the morning, led the Green Dragon Legion, dodged Savi's trap, and defeated the nightmares that came out of nowhere. The 4 green dragons that had been saved by a single sentence from Duke back then were even more eye-catching in this battle as the 4 dragons took the lead in this battle. Thank you, Duque. Thank you for saving the 5-color guardian dragons again and again. Isra's girly voice sounded so cute no matter when he heard it. Sometimes, Duque also thought that if the dragon aspects lost their jobs and transmigrated to Earth, Isra could at least change her profession and become a voice actress. Besides, unlike the annoying dragon aspect Calegos, Isra in her elf form was quite popular. The most popular female characters in World of Warcraft could be determined by how many 18x books they had. Well, Isra had quite a lot of books. Thinking about the time in the near future when Isra would fall, Duque felt a wave of displeasure in his heart. He secretly made a decision. Another rebellion was extinguished without much suspense. Duque let out a long sigh of relief. In the guest house as expected, Duque waited for Tyrant, who was dressed in the white robes of a priestess. The Jeppo robe was cut into the quicksand robe of a priest, and it was even a vacuum version. Tyrant knew that Duque loved this. The beautiful expression that only Duque possessed and that tens of thousands of night elf believers had never imagined appeared on that dignified face that was filled with a holy aura. Just like that, Tyrant knelt down gracefully and began to swallow the divine sword with her mouth. Woo-woo. What powerful skills. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Tyrant did not even want to move a finger. Duque, I want to apologize to you. Tyrant's voice was very soft. Why do you apologize? Brother Stormrage. They are very special existences to me. I did not accept their feelings, but in the eyes of others, even Illidan, I still unconsciously show affection, Tyrant said faintly. Duque smiled. Tyrant actually cared too much about Malfurion. She did not want to lose this pair of childhood friends, but she was also afraid that Duque would be unhappy. Even when Malfurion showed signs of a nightmare, she did not think of asking Duque for help. Duque gently caressed Tyrant's hair. Silly girl, you have stayed chaste for me for tens of thousands of years. Why wouldn't I trust you? Tyrant smiled as well, hugging her man tightly. She wanted nothing more than to fuse her body with Duke's. Hey Duque, do you have any ideas about becoming a true god? Tyrant was actually asking when she would publicly serve Duque. This was the agreement between Duque and Elune. When Duque became a true god, Elune would officially give Tyrant to Duque. Duque's expression darkened. He could only tell the truth. I don't have any ideas yet. I can only confirm that the path of the elements alone is not going to work. If it was in the Dungeons and Dragons world, those who could completely master any of the elements would be true gods made of iron. Moreover, they would be the most powerful gods with great divine power among the true gods. The rules of planet Azeroth were obviously different. Lords who could control the 4 major elements were at most demigods. On the other hand, Thun and the other oddly shaped aliens were true gods. If not for the fact that the statues of the moon goddess were all humanoid, Duque would have thought that this was a world where the aliens were the bosses. Duque had personally snatched the fire demon King Ragnaros's share of the fire element. He had used the system elf to make countless models, but he still could not find a way to become a true god. Duque could confirm that he definitely lacked one or more key elements or abilities. As for what it would depend on luck. If possible, Duque obviously wanted to become a true god before a return of the army. This would give Duque more confidence in fighting Sargeras. Indeed, Duque had used Mediva's power to send Sargeras' soul into a bottomless abyss. It wasn't that Sargeras couldn't come out, but that he didn't have the confidence. In order to sneak in, he had used hundreds of years to trick Mediva's mother. In order to achieve the ultimate goal of invading Azeroth, he didn't mind waiting a little longer. Moreover, it had only been a mere 20 years since the opening of the Dark Portal. For a fallen titan with an infinite lifespan, he could totally afford to wait. The entire history of Azeroth was a process of waxing and waning. In the history of the Azeroth Alliance and the Horde, there were indeed many powerhouses and many inspiring stories in the later stages. However, without exception, it made Duque feel that there was a lack of a sense of history. This was not an illusion. When the Alliance came to William's son, Anduin Wrynn, to carry the flag, Countless players were complaining that each generation was worse than the previous. However, this life of Duque should be much better. Hugging Tyrant, Duque looked at the Wife Hunter achievement that the bastard system elf had given him. He almost wanted to kill the system elf on the spot. Duque held back. Buddha said, "Don't say it." Such an achievement, it was good that he knew. Ahem. Tyrant, you have to rebuild the defense line at Mount Hyjal as soon as possible. I can sense that Land of Fire will be near Mount Hyjal. Chapter 1777. Okay, Tyrant agreed. The two of them had wanted to spend some time together, but they were soon woken up by the noise of the crowd. Victory! The great traitor Savis has finally been executed. Haha, yes, there was actually a small incident last night. The King of Nightmares, Savis, had been killed. In the original history, after knowing that the mastermind was Savis, and that Isra had been captured by Savis to save him, Malfurion came up with a new plan to deal with Savis. He wanted to kill the King of Nightmares and save the people trapped in nightmares. He found Brawl and Hamuer, and gathered those who were not affected by the nightmares to attract the attention of the King of Nightmares. It was a classic diversion. The fake attack force was formed by Varian from the Alliance and Bane, the son of the Tauren chief Cain. Not only that, but the red, blue and green dragons had also joined the battle. Even the neutral goblins, kobolds, bear monsters, and even some forest beasts had joined the resistance army. After entering the Emerald Dream, Malfurion found the place where Isra was imprisoned. For this, he sacrificed the powerful green dragon Iranicus to destroy the cage that imprisoned Isra and save him. Next was to defeat Savis again. This required attacking both his body and soul at the same time, or else Savis would continue to be reborn. Savis was very strong, and even with Isra's help, he was still no match for Savi's strength. In the end, Malfurion borrowed the power of the entire Azeroth, and in an instant the entire Azeroth began to rain, the druid's tranquility skill. The heavy rain began to wash away the green fog, and some of the corrupted people began to awaken. Finally they killed Savis en masse. In the original history, Malfurion, the super druid, was at his peak. Unfortunately, in this life there was Duque. Although Duke kept singing, "I'll just quietly watch you act cool," to his daughter all day long, in reality, he couldn't stand people acting cool the most. It was fine to watch others seek death but not acting cool. Especially those who were his women in this life, the original wives in the original version of history. Since Duque had saved Isra, he had also dug a hole for Savis. With Duque's warning, not only did Isra not get captured, but he also set up an illusion in the dream and forced Savis to reveal his true body. Originally, Savis had hoped that Fandral would be able to steal control of Teldrassil and then use the power of the Fallen World Tree to wreak havoc. A fellow who only liked to play tricks would definitely have limited strength in a direct confrontation. When the conspiracy was exposed, Savi's failure was doomed. He didn't possess as much power as he did in the original history. Sarvis could be considered to be extremely strong. When Savis and his main nightmare minions were forced out of the Emerald Dream, Malfurion directly used Tranquility to attack Savi's body and the minions of the King of Nightmares. With Malfurion in the real world and Isra in the Emerald Dream tying down Savi's power, this was the best opportunity for the orc Sora to enter the Emerald Dream. Sora raised the divine weapon that Brock had used to injure Sargeras and swung it at Harvey's Tree of Souls. At the same time, the multiple attacks of the real world and the dream world completely destroyed Savis. Before Savis was completely destroyed, he kept asking for help from his master, Enzoth, who was supporting him, but the ruthless Enzoth didn't respond to him. Thus, what should have been a very grand conspiracy and dangerous situation disappeared without a trace before it was fully launched. Duque still didn't make a move. Firstly, dream power wasn't his forte. Secondly, it was a bit embarrassing for a demigod like him to personally deal with Savis. Who was Savis? In the ancient war back then, he was tricked by Duque into becoming a follower. He was fooled until he didn't know where he was tricked. This guy would cause trouble 10,000 years later, and he didn't even dare to directly attack Duque. If he didn't even have this kind of courage, Duque would only lower his status if he personally dealt with him. Duque stayed with the Night Elves for 3 days in a row. Every day he was half openly with Tyrant. Tyrant's adopted daughter Chandris was about to go berserk before Duque left. The Dark Iron Dwarves couldn't stay any longer. It was a little funny. The dwarf Princess Moira, who stole the highest authority of the dwarves in his previous life, had a rather bitter life. Although the only enemy left of her and her father was the Dark Iron Child, and she successfully angered Magni's beard to the point that it rose in the air, the dark iron dwarves that she led went from bad to worse. When the cataclysm happened, the dark iron dwarves finally couldn't go on any longer. It was very simple. It was because Duque had destroyed the molten core. Using Duke Hydraxia's hand, Duque flooded the entire molten core, allowing the burning steps to recover its vitality. This made life difficult for the dark iron dwarves who used the molten core's endless flames to forge their weapons and live. The majestic Blackrock Mountain had now become a fountain due to the geological changes of the cataclysm. The movement of the Earth's crust had compressed the water that had accumulated in the molten core, causing it to spurt out of the ground without a reason. No matter how many tunnels the dark iron dwarves dug in the Blackrock Mountain, how could they avoid being flooded? In this era, how could there be so many sophisticated waterproofing layers, protective doors, and so on? A few days after the cataclysm, the dwarven sentries of Iron Stove Castle at the front line of the Scorching Canyon reported the discovery of a large number of dark iron dwarves. Originally, for the sake of Moira, Muradin, who had become the regent, wanted to pretend that he didn't see them. Who knew that more and more dark iron dwarves would gather, and eventually more than 200,000 people would emerge, marching towards the barren land in the northeast. This time Muradin Bronzebeard couldn't sit still. To the north of the barren land was Loch Moden, which was the most severely affected by the cataclysm. As the largest source of food for the Bronzebeard dwarves, the status of Loch Moden after the cataclysm was extremely important. The dark iron dwarves had come out, obviously looking for food. The barren land, as the name implied, that place where even birds wouldn't defecate, could not support more than 200,000 dark iron dwarves. Where else could they go? Wasn't it to Loch Moden? The Bronzebeard dwarves and the Wildhammer dwarves had long been reconciled, but not the dark iron dwarves. If more than 200,000, and probably more than this number of dark iron dwarves rushed into Loch Moden, the Bronzebeard dwarves would be in trouble. Who knew what the hundreds of thousands of old enemies would do? Muradin directly called for help from the Alliance and launched a classic ambush siege. In fact, it was not appropriate to call it a war because when the dark iron dwarves were suddenly surrounded by more than 100,000 mechanized troops, they looked at the black barrels of diesel tanks, and then at the huge flying warships hovering in the sky. They were stunned on the spot. I, Moira, in the name of the Queen of the Dark Iron Dwarves, request a meeting of the Three Hammers, the short and fat trader of the Bronzebeard family said. Chapter 1778. If she wasn't Moira Bronzebeard, Muradin's hand would have trembled a long time ago, and the dark iron dwarves would have become history. This was not an exaggeration. Duque waved his pen and a strengthened version of Fatty, Little Fatty, was sent to the barren lands by Muradin. As a threatening attack, Little Fatty, its mushroom cloud and earth-shattering tremors scared the dark iron dwarves half to death. Of course, it only blew up some wild dogs and vultures in the barren lands, but the dark iron dwarves, who hadn't seen the world for hundreds of years and were still stuck in the era of cold weapons and gunpowder, had never seen such a ferocious thing. They peed their pants on the spot. Knowing that this was a show of strength from the Alliance, even if Moira was slapped on the left side of her face, she could only offer the right side of her face for the Alliance to slap. A group of dark iron dwarves were immediately disarmed and treated as prisoners. They were escorted by 30,000 mixed Alliance troops to the snowy Dan Molar. Near the Helm Lake in the east, the Alliance used a series of standard molded houses to build a refugee camp that could accommodate 300,000 dark iron dwarves in less than 3 days. Of course, other than the pitch-black cannons and the new spears on the walls of the refugee camp, the Bronzebeard dwarves were still very warm to the dark iron dwarves. At least there was no shortage of food, clothing, and medicine. There were also people stationed 24 hours a day to solve the various problems of the dark iron dwarves, and they swore in the name of the Bronzebeard dwarves that they would not kill them. Moira was brought to the Iron Furnace Castle, and under the guidance of a group of Bronzebeard dwarven elders, she met her father who had become a diamond person. For a moment her mind became active. If her father had suddenly become a diamond person and died without any last words, then she could naturally take over the power of the Bronzebeard dwarves. Because Duque had a trick up his sleeve, she would be in trouble. In this life, there would definitely not be any conflicts where Anduin Rin was imprisoned by Moira, and William came to save his son in a rage. Anyway, the general framework was set in stone by Duque, and Moira could not play any tricks no matter how she jumped around. Duque even considerately did not appear in the Iron Furnace Castle, as if the dwarves' affairs were decided by the dwarves. As expected, the dwarves still formed the Council of Three Hammers just like in history. Unlike the original version, it turned out that Moira had used dishonorable means to steal power. In this life, it was Muradin who fully deserved to become the chairman of the Three Hammer Council. The strongest Bronzebeard dwarves had 2 votes, while the Wild Hammer dwarves and the Dark Iron dwarves had 1 vote each. This meant that anything the Bronzebeard dwarves wanted to do, they could do it. On the other hand, if Ebon and Wild Hammer wanted to object, they would only be able to get 2 votes from each other who they disliked, to put the motion on hold indefinitely. What Duque really cared about was Gilnis' return. As one of the 7 human kingdoms, Gilnis could be said to be the last piece of the puzzle for the human faction in the Alliance. If history had been as it had been and Rotterdam, Alterac and Stormguard had all been destroyed, Duque wouldn't have cared if Gilnis had returned or not. But in this life, not only did Duque protect all the kingdoms, he even restored the once destroyed Strongguard. Gilnis was the only one left outside. It was like playing mahjong with 3 players missing, it was as awkward as it could get. However, as history progressed, everything was solved. During the second battle of the Dark Portal, King Xeon Greymane initially rejected Anduin Lothar and King Tarina's request to invite Gilnis to join the Alliance. But in the end, under the suggestion of Vincent Godfrey, he agreed to join the Alliance and send a small group of soldiers to support the Alliance. When the Second War finally ended and the Alliance demanded high taxes from Gilnis to build the Orc Shelter and Overwatch Fortress, and Gilnis couldn't get anything out of Alterac's territory, Xeon Greymane decisively left the Alliance. Not only that, in order to prevent the Alliance from interfering, Gilnis finally decided to build a high wall to separate himself from the other kingdoms. He even went as far as to cut off the southern Silverpine forest that originally belonged to Gilnis, the territory of the Crowley family, Burningwood Village and Ambermere. It was worth mentioning that although Gilnis announced that he was cutting off contact with the outside world, King Tarinas invited King Xeon Greymane to attend the baptism ceremony of Prince Arthas of Lordaeron at the Cathedral of Light in Stormwind City. In the 15th year of the Dark Portal, when the Third Dark Portal War broke out, following Arthas' fall and betrayal, the Scourge invaded Lordaeron. The latter sent messengers to Gilnis for help, but they were rejected by King Xeon Greymane. However, the Scourge didn't let this isolated country go. One of the armies attacked the Greymane Wall when Arthas led the main force of the Scourge south. In the face of such a huge disparity in military strength, King Xeon was forced to use Archmage Errigal's method to resist the invasion of the Scourge, summoning werewolves. Although the werewolves of Errigal eventually repelled the invasion of the Scourge army, it also began to spread among the survivors of Lordaeron and Gilnis in the Silverpine Forest, sowing the seeds of the curse of the Gilnis werewolves in the future. When Prince Arthas's army completely destroyed Lordaeron and the Dalajan, Jaina, with the support of Duque, launched the largest westward expedition in human history. King Xeon was not enthusiastic about this, but another lord who had a good impression of the Alliance and advocated for open borders, Darius Crowley, publicly declared his opposition to the king's policy. He sent his own army under the name of the Gilnis Brigade to join Jaina's fleet in the Alliance's fleet. This was the foreshadowing of the split between them in the future. In the following years, although the Greymane Wall isolated the threat of the Scourge and werewolves to Gilnis, the curse of the werewolves still inevitably began to spread in this isolated land. In the beginning, the spread of the curse was limited and small. The king and other nobles would bring hunting rifles into the Black Forest on the night of the full moon to secretly hunt the werewolves that occupied the area. However, this limited containment was forced to stop after an accident. King Xeon Greymane was bitten by a werewolf and contracted the curse. Fortunately, his royal doctor, Kellinan, managed to temporarily suppress the bestial nature of the curse and the changes in his body. Not only that, but a mysterious night elf priestess appeared in his field of vision. Her name was Belisa. A werewolf that was later called the Old Wolf King by the players, Xeon Greymane, was finally born. Chapter 1779. Belisa successfully helped King Greymane suppress his werewolf nature for a long time and told him about the origin of the werewolf curse. A group of night elf druids abused the wild power given by nature, resulting in disastrous consequences and hopeless depravity. With the death of Errigal, his summoned werewolves regained their freedom. Once a fallen, one of the stubborn claw druids, Layla claimed to be the leader and formed a wolf-worshipping cult among the werewolves known as the Bloodfang werewolves. Many people of Gilnis betrayed their country and joined this secret organization for various reasons. They moved secretly under the high walls of the Gilnis kingdom, spreading the curse to more and more people in an unstoppable manner. When the werewolf curse spread, and the people could neither find safety nor escape from the high walls, Lord Darius Crowley launched a mutiny and attacked Grayman's palace in Gilneas. He declared that he wanted to overthrow the tyranny of the Jinn and end the isolation of the kingdom to save Gilneas. The civil war was very bloody and intense. Although Crowley's army was defeated by the king and imprisoned, the kingdom also suffered heavy losses and fell into chaos. The remnants of the rebel army were still active throughout the kingdom from time to time. They even hid countless firearms in the capital in an attempt to start a second civil war. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lael, who was growing stronger and stronger, launched a fatal attack on the fragile capital. The Gilneas kingdom's guards and royal guards were quickly defeated by the Bloodfang werewolves. Countless people were killed or cursed in this battle. In desperation, King Darius and his soldiers were freed and pardoned by King Xian. With the help of his daughter, Rona, the rebel army at the North Gate regained the weapons used in the Civil War and covered the retreat of the refugees in the Cathedral of Light of Dawn. Unlike in history, there weren't any Forsaken attacking Gilneas in this life. So, after gathering the entire nation's forces and allowing the rescued werewolves living in Tarandor to join Gilneas, the Bloodfang werewolves' attack was defeated. In the next few years, Gilneas experienced several serious rebellions and coups, which almost exhausted the kingdom's vitality. When the cataclysm came, Gilneas's economy finally collapsed. Gilneas was the smallest nation among the 7 nations, only slightly larger than Alterac. Back then, in order to prevent the alliance from rudely interfering with internal affairs, they even gave up on the most fertile silverpine forest territory and built the Greymane Wall at the southern end of the mountain. The rest of the terrain was mainly mountainous, and it was destined that there was not much food production. Even with such a small amount of arable land, it still required a lot of manpower to cultivate and plant. With the werewolves wreaking havoc, not only did food production decline, but even hunting in the forest became incomparably difficult. It was already a blessing that the cataclysm did not cause Gilneas any anger. Unfortunately, the earthquake easily collapsed a large number of houses and a large section of the city wall of Gilneas City. This was simply adding insult to injury. According to history, King Xian had been introduced to the alliance by the Archdruid Malfurion, and thus met William. But in this life, Duque felt a little surprised. What? Jean Greymane wants to see me? In the middle of the night? Duque, who happened to be in the South Sea City with Elugia for a state visit in the middle of the night, received this news. Duque was a little unhappy. Duque Xian is a king after all. It must be urgent for him to want to see you in the middle of the night. Elugia tried to persuade him. All right. Duque used the 999 consecutive strikes of Duque's godly sword in one go and sent the Queen of Alterac to the sky. After tidying up a little, he saw the tired old alpha wolf in the study. Xian was obviously very surprised. He did not think that Duque would actually be willing to meet him in the middle of the night. His mouth moved for a long time, but he could not say a word. Duque carefully looked at the old alpha wolf and suddenly found that he did not know what to say. Indeed, Xian was old and his hair had become extremely white. Duque felt that he was even more pleasing to the eye. Back then, Xian was a typical political villain. Not only was he fat, but he was also all kinds of sarcastic and picky. When there was trouble, he would shrink back, and when there was benefit, he would roll over like a hungry dog that saw a bone. Although he was old now, he looked more capable. His white hair was parted at 6 to 4, hanging to the side of his chin. His arms, which used to be full of fat, were now only left with explosive power and beautiful muscles. His tight black silk clothes showed off his muscles, and the golden leather armor that exposed his shoulders and leggings completely rid him of the image of a scholar. Xian, who was once recognized by the first generation of the Alliance as one of the 5 weaklings who was only fit to play sandpiling with Tarinas during the war, should be quite powerful now. Duque teased, Xian, why do I feel that you are even more handsome now than you were back then? That one sentence made Xian's nervous mood fly away. At least Duque is not too distant to me. He let out a long sigh. I can't compare to you. Eternal life and youth. Duque walked to the wine cabinet. Do you want something to drink? Elucia is very rich, you won't be able to make her poor. This was actually the queen's study, specially prepared by Elucia for Duque's use. Duque treated this place like his own home. Xian was a little embarrassed, but he quickly adjusted his emotions. Do you have Alterac's gold wine? I really miss it. Of course. Duque poured the wine and handed the glass to Xian. Xian swirled the crystal glass, letting the rum-like liquid spread in the air, then drank it in one gulp, suddenly saying, Oh my God! What was I thinking back then? I was afraid that the alliance would swallow my country, so I sealed it off for more than 20 years. Duque shrugged. Aren't you afraid that the alliance will swallow Gilnis now? You should know that without the cataclysm, I would have married 4 queens. Xion was a little disappointed. He did not even dare to look at Duque. He rubbed the glass with his fingers as if trying to hide his uneasiness. Gilnis is almost finished regardless of the alliance. Half of the people have turned into werewolves, and the other half are struggling in fear and hunger. I have no choice. But the alliance has a choice, Duque emphasized. Jean's heart almost froze when he heard this. Yes, the alliance did not have to accept Gilnis. Chapter 1780. If it had been the arrogant, eccentric and self-righteous Jean from before, he would have left already. As time went by, people would actually change. Moreover, Gilnis had left the alliance 5 years after the Dark Portal. Such a long period of time had caused Jean's mentality and temperament to change greatly. Even though he knew that this was probably Duque's test, Jean didn't dare to take the risk. Gilnis no longer had any capital to bargain with the alliance. To put it bluntly, Gilnis was now a forgotten country, a dispensable pebble on the side of the road. Although Jean had been wary of and refused the alliance's infiltration for many years, and although this method had been effective 15 years ago after the Dark Portal, the prosperity and power of the alliance were displayed in front of the people of Gilnis almost every day after Duque came to power. Especially after South Shore was built into South Shore City, Alterac was rebuilt, and the north and south coasts were built into the ports of Lordaeron. Looking down from the towering cliffs of Gilnis, countless ships could be seen passing through the sea day and night. On the map, South Shore City was located near the junction of 2 sunken continents. For the sake of maritime safety, Duque specially set a route. Merchant ships and warships all sailed from Barradine Bay in the south to South Shore City, and then along the north coast all the way around Hillsbrad Hills and Gilnis to the south. In order to facilitate navigation at night, there was a shore lighthouse every 3 kilometers along the entire coast, except for Gilnis. On the high seas opposite Gilnis territory, Duque also used a large number of murlocs to build lighthouses for the helmsman to control the ship. During the day they could see the ship directly, and at night they could see the lights at the bow and stern of the ship. At first, Jean thought that this was a deliberate demonstration by the Alliance, but he soon discovered that the maritime trade of the Alliance was really flourishing. This was because he could clearly distinguish which were Stormwinds, which were Kurtiras, Alteracs, and occasionally Dalagens and Ironforged flags. Recently, he could even see the long-lost flag of the Stromgard Kingdom from Torrent Fortress. On the south coast, there were these and Lordaeron's flags. If these ships symbolized the prosperity of the Alliance, then the Alliance's flying battleships that occasionally flew by were a declaration of the Alliance's strength to the world. After Stromgard was reinstated, the people of Stormgard didn't hesitate to sacrifice their lives and fought bravely on the front lines because of Donna's good sense of justice. Duque increased the treatment of Stormgard and allowed the Alliance's newly built 4th Air Fleet to dock next to Riptide Castle. This was not a political threat, but a form of support. This was because the members of this fleet were basically people from Torrential Castle, and the Alliance had built a new spare parts production center there, using the minerals in the earthy highlands to produce and maintain the airships there. The Alliance was the one who paid. Every member country of the Alliance adhered to the principle of those who had the money contributed, and those who had the strength contributed. As a newly restored country, Stromgard's membership fee for the next 10 years was a symbolic 1 gold coin per year. The Alliance, on the other hand, paid the 4th Fleet millions of gold coins for maintenance every year. The industrial system that was created to suit the geography of Stromgard greatly boosted the local economy. Almost everyone in Riptide Castle could feel the sincerity of the Alliance, and their loyalty to the Alliance increased. With Gilnis in a desperate situation, Xion ordered his scouts to secretly gather intelligence on the Alliance, and the first thing he knew was how prosperous Alterac was, and how the people of Stromgard, who were rolling in ruins a few years ago, rose in such a short time. To be honest, he was very envious. But be it Gilnis or him, their positions were quite awkward. The Alliance could ignore Gilnis, but if they angered the Alliance might even treat the people of Gilnis as monsters and slaughter them all. Xion himself was even more so. Logically speaking, he was definitely a veteran in the Alliance. Among the 7 human kings when the Alliance was first established, Tarinas, Antonidas, Eden Piranid, Salas Trollbane, Langrin, and Dalin Proudmoore all died for various reasons. There was also Anduin Lothar, who was the chief commander. Without Duque, Xion, who wanted to join the Alliance again, would be the only first-generation elder. This could be said to be an absolute taboo in politics. If you were more senior than the current leader of the alliance, where would the leader put his face? Fortunately, there was still Duque. At that time, the excessively young Duque was the deputy commander of the alliance. Logically speaking, he was just an admiral. In the original history, finding Malfurion as a middleman was something that had to be done. In this life it was not so troublesome, and he believed that he understood Duque better. As for Duque saying that the alliance has a choice, Xion had no objections. He said in a nearly servile tone, "Yes, the alliance has a choice. But Sir Marcus, have you ever thought that the alliance needs a melee soldier?" Duque was interested. It seemed that Xion had secretly done his homework. "I think you won't deny that even if the alliance has developed to the point where it has terrifying artillery, but professionals can still ignore the power of artillery to a certain extent, right?" said Xion carefully. "Yes, go on." Duque nodded. Xion secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The alliance seriously lacks warrior professionals. Elves and gnomes are not suitable, their physiques are not suitable. Dwarves and Draenei are both very suitable, but unfortunately the number of dwarves and Draenei is not large. Humans, who have the largest population, are the most suitable. Unfortunately, compared to beastmen and taurens, the human physiques are not even comparable to trolls. Seeing that Duque did not object, Xion made a recommendation. "Many people of Gilnis have been bitten by werewolves and turned into werewolves. But they can control themselves very well and will not fall into madness and lose control. These humans turned into werewolves are quite suitable as warriors. Whether it is a quick assault or a head-on confrontation, werewolves are faster than humans, have a better physique and have stronger vitality. Many injuries that are fatal for humans are not a problem for werewolves." At this point, Xion's voice became softer. "As long as humans do not hate or fear werewolves, I think werewolves will be a very good addition to the alliance." Having said that, he looked eagerly at Duque, stared at Duque's mouth with an expectant gaze, swallowed his saliva, and prepared to listen to the words that would come out of Duque's mouth, which were tantamount to the verdict of a trial. Duque smiled. "Werewolves, right? Actually, there is no problem." Chapter 1781. After hearing Duke's words, Xion's heart that had been hanging in the air for a long time finally calmed down. The alliance was not Duque's decision, but Duque had the power to veto any external countries joining the alliance. With Duque's green light, the rest was much easier. Of course, for the sake of Gilnis' future, Xion would definitely visit all the kings and leaders of the alliance. Even if he could not get their support, he would at least get to know them. In fact, Xion was thinking too much. This had to do with him leaving the alliance too early. The 5 years at the Dark Portal was the time when Tyrrhena's was the most aggressive in discriminating against outsiders. At that time, the alliance was a stage for ambitious politicians to seek personal benefits for their own countries. After Duque took over, he swept away the bureaucratic style and narrow-minded nationalism with the help of the economy and military. Through the integration of the natural resources and manpower of the entire Eastern Kingdom, he created the harmonious coexistence of the alliance today. Due to Duke's special method of dealing with the queens of many countries, he controlled the agriculture and trade of the entire alliance. In fact, many of the suggestions passed by the alliance throne without any mandatory requirements had become ironclad laws. Otherwise, whoever caused trouble today would find that there were no more merchants visiting them the next day. The originally cheap food, fruits, minerals, a series of daily necessities produced by light industries, and heavy industry machinery would all be greatly increased or out of stock. Punitive tariffs would also be imposed when entering or leaving the borders of other countries. In a sense, because the alliance in this life was more powerful, and maritime trade was more popular, Gilnis did not have to rely on the sea to replenish its food supply like in history. 15 years after the Dark Portal, King Xion even issued a sea ban, forbidding people from entering within 5 kilometers of the sea. He also set up a large number of sentry towers. Therefore, the food shortage was even more serious. As for Xion's worry about the werewolves being discriminated against, Duque's reaction was even more interesting. Duque shrugged. "Now the people are starting to accept the Death Knights. What are you werewolves? As long as you don't go crazy and kill people, nothing will happen. But in order to distinguish the citizens of Gilnis from the Bloodfang werewolves, I will give you a special symbol. Don't worry, nobody will discriminate against werewolves." "Really?" Old Xion was still in disbelief. "Then should I transform?" "Go ahead. I'll just treat it as a show." The old Wolf King transformed. In just a second, his limbs and body grew as if they were inflated. The muscles on his arms swelled and stretched, and his round fingers became extremely sharp, giving birth to black, sharp claws. A square mouth abruptly elongated into a ferocious wolf head, full of sharp crisscrossed fangs. Fortunately, his armor was specially made. It would expand as his body changed so it wouldn't break. Wow, so scary. Duque whistled. There was no trace of fear on his face. The old Wolf King was puzzled and depressed. Duque smiled. Gilnis scouts are failing. They didn't even get so much information. Change back. Jean could only smile foolishly and transform back. I'm not bragging, but the people of the Alliance have long been psychologically immune to shock. Jean lost his voice. Duque clapped his hands and pretended to call someone, but in fact, it was a voice of the soul. Soon, an elegant female voice sounded outside the study. Master, you called? Come in. Following Duque's call, the old Wolf King saw an elegant noble lady in a red skirt with black trim slowly walk in. King Jean's gentlemanly behavior was acting up. Hello, beautiful lady, I am King Jean Grayman of Gilnis. May I know your name? The beautiful countess glanced at Duque and said with a smile, You can call me by my human name, Countess Katrana. Oh, Jean's heart skipped a beat. Sure enough, there was more. Of course, I prefer the dragon name you call me, Onyxia, the Black Dragon Princess. That's right, I am the daughter of Nethario, the Deathwing who demolished Lordaeron back then. The old Wolf King's expression was very interesting. His heart was about to fly out of his chest, and his mouth was so wide open that it could fit a man's fist. Very satisfied with Xion's reaction, Onyxia, who was completely immersed in her role, revealed a smile full of melancholy. Unfortunately, the current me has already been subdued by the great Master Duke Marcus. I have become a lowly mount, ridden by Master day and night. After saying that, she even put on a half-kneeling posture, similar to Lin Dayu's flower burial, and gently pointed out the window with her thumb and middle finger. As a result, Duque slapped her butt and she let out a small scream on the spot. Duque lifted her skirt and ordered, Come, show Jean your tail. Onyxia pouted and did as she was told. Then Jean saw a black, python-like dragon tail sticking out from under her skirt, and the meteor hammer-like tail swung in a circle in the air. Okay, you can go out. Onyxia, who was completely possessed by the drama queen, went out with a face full of resentment, like an abandoned woman abandoned by her lover. Duke's face was full of black lines, and he used another 2 minutes to briefly introduce Onyxia's history in the Alliance, leaving Jean dumbfounded. No. Actually, I'm just giving you an example. After I took over the Alliance's soldiers and civilians became quite open-minded. As long as you fight for the Alliance, for Azeroth. No matter what kind of existence you are, you should be accepted and respected. Then there will always be opponents, right? Jean asked worriedly. The Alliance respects individual ideas. As long as they don't start rumors or gather people to promote narrow racist views, the Alliance doesn't care. What if they insist? Duque curled his lips. The Alliance's frontline assault team is always short of people. Last time, there were hundreds of idiots who held up signs and shouted that the noble blood of the Blood Elves should not be tarnished by humans, but they all died fighting against evil. At this moment, Jean was moved. Looking at the faint holy golden light on Duque, his eyes became moist. What a noble leader he had in mind. Duque was so universal, so broad-minded. Jean suddenly understood a little why Duque could control such a huge organization with so many races, nationalities, and such a complicated population composition. You are a great man. Oh, a demigod. I salute you from the bottom of my heart. It has nothing to do with status, it's purely out of my personal admiration. With that, the Wolf King bowed deeply to Duque. No, I'm actually doing it for myself. At this moment, Jean thought that Duque was just being polite and didn't take it to heart. Not long after, he realized that what Duque said was actually true. Scum who got in the way of me starting a harem can go shit. Chapter 1782. After sending off the old alpha wolf, Duque was in a good mood. When he returned to his bedroom, he found Alicia staring at him with her big watery eyes. Not going to sleep? I'm just concerned about what our neighbor in Alterac talked to you about. You can come along. Duque didn't care. No, if I go without talking to you I'll feel less imposing. Duque smiled and didn't say a word. As expected, this was Xion's problem. Most of the leaders in the Alliance were his juniors. If Duque didn't give in, no one wanted to talk to him, let alone promise him anything. This was why Xian had to lower his voice and really tuck his tail between his legs when he rejoined the alliance. After all, one mistake and Gilnis would be the target of everyone. Duque patted Alicia's butt. Don't worry, it's done. In a sense, the Gilnis werewolves are more useful than the warriors of Riptide Fortress. Okay, then I'll go spread the news. Go. As the weakest member of Duque's harem, Alicia had her own unique role. She was more like a logistics housekeeper. Born in the wealthy Bara family, she carried this trait forward after becoming the queen. Now, she not only controlled more than half of the alliance's business activities, but she was also Duque's intelligence chief and press officer. There was no such thing as freedom of speech in Azeroth, so Duque happily copied the Chinese press. Ever since Duque became the commander of the alliance, he had a plan to guide the public opinion of the alliance. When the pressure of war was high, he would publicize the dangers of the evil faction, eulogize the sacrifice of the frontline soldiers, and point out the contribution of the people in the rear to the frontline. Because the reports were quite real, and everything could be verified when the frontline soldiers returned in triumph, the alliance's official report was very credible, and the people accepted it very well. What Duque didn't know was that after tonight, Alicia's royal pen group would write about the role of the Gilneas people in the Second World War. While almost ignoring the conflict between Tarinas and Xian, he pointed out the suffering of the people of Gilneas. They claimed that they were also victims of the werewolf curse. With this foreshadowing, it was only logical for the alliance to announce Gilnes's membership after Jean had communicated with the leaders of the various countries. At this time, Alicia was talking about something else. Oh yes, why does Sister Kalia's stomach seem to be quiet again? Duque smiled bitterly. I already have the body of a demigod. It's not so easy to give birth to a demigod's son. If she rashly allowed her child to wantonly absorb nutrients from her mother's body, Kalia would instantly turn into a dried corpse. Also, in order to give birth to my child, I must try my best to eliminate my other elements and combine them with her own suitable elements. For example, Aurelia is wind, so she can only give birth to children of the wind attribute. Alicia was tongue-tied. I'm also a mage, wouldn't it be easier for me? Duke's eyes swept across Alicia's smooth belly. With your radiant moon strength, you're able to allow a child of a demigod to absorb fire, ice, and arcane elemental energy without limit? Ah. Alicia first cried out in surprise, then suddenly became full of energy. Yes. It's time for me to become a Breaking Dawn mage. Seeing Alicia waving her little fists excitedly like a little girl, Duque really didn't want to discourage her. Success was 1% talent and 99% perspiration. Unfortunately, it was often that 1% that determined a person's upper limit. In history, Alicia had left the stage of history early, partly because of her tragic fate, but also because her talent was too low. Otherwise, even if she became an undead, she could still grow into a lich like Kel Thuzad. Duque checked her body and found that her elemental affinity was really not high. Unless Duke ascended to become a true god and gave Aluxia a complete body transformation to increase the degree of elemental conversion, the Radiant Moon Realm would be her limit. We'll see how things go in the future. Just like that, 7 days later the Alliance welcomed the Throne Conference. Although a few leaders were absent due to attack missions, the remaining leaders of the Alliance voted unanimously to allow Gilnis to rejoin the Alliance. Additionally, after the various countries of the Alliance signed a series of trade contracts and food aid plans with Gilnis, Gilnis would send out werewolf troops to join the Alliance's military. On the other hand, the Alliance would send out the newly formed 7th Army to help Gilnis clear out the bloodthirsty werewolves in his territory. At the same time, Kale, that's would also send out his subordinate, Astromancer Caponia, to destroy Gilnis' Shadowfang castle. When the Alliance took in the last piece of the puzzle, something happened that made Duque dumbfounded. At this point in history, Duque wasn't sure if this had anything to do with the godly dragon's tail. Originally, the twin-headed ogre boss Google would hide in the Twilight Fortress in the Twilight Highlands in the east of the wetlands, waiting for the powerhouses of the Alliance and the Horde to challenge him. In this life, perhaps the Alliance managed the entire Eastern Kingdom like an iron bucket, or perhaps the Alliance's airship fleet prevented Google from returning to his nest. History took a big turn. Google led a large group of Twilight believers and occupied the Great Rift Valley in the Barrenlands after the Cataclysm. Now, this terrifying lava scar divided the Barrenlands into the North and South Barrenlands. Google stayed in the middle of the Great Rift Valley in the creeping oasis that was created due to the tectonic shift, recruiting believers and building a fortress. Because the Horde's current predicament was far worse than in history, Google's lunatic doomsday theory attracted more than 200,000 tribesmen to join. In the end, Google announced that this was the Twilight Fortress. One Google alone was enough to give brain-dead Roar a headache, but there were also a lot of eyewitness reports. A very powerful giant dragon that seemed to be an undead dragon led a group of purplish-red giant dragons to the Twilight Fortress. This greatly strengthened the combat power of the new Twilight Fortress. To make matters worse for the Horde, the purplish-red giant dragons that used the Twilight Fortress as their base began to hunt for food in the vicinity, indiscriminately attacking any creature that didn't have the emblem of a Twilight believer. Regardless of whether it was wild animals, monsters, orcs, trolls, or taurens, everything that could move was within their attack range. After Duke confirmed the news, he let out an almost hysterical laugh. According to Aluhia, it sounded like a pig laughing. Ah! Braindead Roar, this is what you get. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.